Sanje Chada Soje Chanala Chanje Bode Dane Jazanje Dage Jesu Jebe Dola Penje Sanje Doba Sho Sanje Chana Soje Chanala Chanje Bode Dane Jazanje Dage Chenye Jebe Sonaji Dola Penje Sanje Doba Sanje Chana Soje Chana Chanje Bade Dane Jazanje Dage Chenye Jebe Sona Dola Penje Sanje Doba Sho Jinkambo Yo Benza Renge A Siji Saji O Benza Renge A Shijare Kuyungi Kuye Uzuri Jabore Chalaba Bolo Dambo Ne Balanje Jadame Le Dalimba Ngaya Dangaya Yunde Dalan Jundu Dame Nyeda Dame Nije Rewo Je Rewo Bazanje Denje Ba Mamo Bayelot Kolo Rembo Je Nobo Rembo Somo Rembo Je Lombo Rembo Lambo Rembo Je Tanjo Rembo Mabo Rembo Ejembo Yebo Ma Gemo Ma Chewa Ma Le Ma Ga Ma Medo Dobo Ma Naze Ma Deja Nye Ma Dawa Rembo Do Chole Namba Jaye Janse Uzalada Penje Bozo Zova Mansawa Mebande Da Jeje Zova Ade Lama Damba Yonje Ge Shinye Jemo Ge Ye Dange Pes Yanga Ne Teba Jemo Sonje Zamo Je Yede Jingambo Tujin Duye Tende Jesu So Jene Jada So Ma Je Dange Dada Seje Dan Jeje Denye Ja Sonye Zo Nye De Mbo Lord, so Saji Boy, Joy, She, Me, Do,
Ci zonga ba chimbe sungla. Denjur nye ga tsela long me ba. Yila kumbe tsede nang shen do sa. Denjur nye ga tsela long me ba. Yila kumbe tsede nang shen do. Lendre milo kuwe tungye nam yang samna chimbe nang shen do. Tetar kumbe kuwe punzo la yimi kechi sama me jish. Nye zen kundu tarwa tunye lo juna tesi nye ju keba la sa. Tukabzlan. Tenjo nye ka tsela loma, ngara zu metse de sungora, che choba la telwa, kumba, tunji sama jora se, tenjo uru se, nye kawa se, tenjo milu de pe nye kawa, kiawa mambo chi sa ni mato, tenjo milu tupge wa marwa, o ti ndeza ko kyu de pe sa kabo, ngara zu nam yu ha kurwa, tikba paa kiawa tupge de Kale Kaburwa, Tipel Juedi ko Nagi Judura, or Tindicasre. Tencho Niekawa Disura. Niekawa did good in Niekawa, so that in Niekasura. Tencho Niekas. Tell a long mebas. Taniekawa, the Yerumbush Tempus Tangana. Church here in a Tambunga and Jude Legacy, Sangmachen, Chamakanga Sasan, Lulu Church Shora. titendeke yo marwa sela longme bas shira duzu yo mare shara duzu to yo na de kaje yo ne me tendeke yo marwa namchik neba ke yo marwa shira duzu rimbuchi yo marwa kaje tenge na loja sigre loja na ne mabu chinsa ge zone shira de ke yo marwa chida chana ta de ba de tendeke yo marwa denjo nyega sela longme bas yila kumbe chede nangshedos ti samlu tangi yena ene chede chibu tanda che goko che tikba sa kuna sa ro kare che kuna che pe wa chede keben chungse ji tanda lya to che keben che yong tanda lya ne tikba tup kuna kare che na che pe ba shiwara o de de ma re sura denjo nyega chela longme ba yila sambe chede nangshendo chede chibu tanda lya shenja shuk chimbu che timado dile habo shenke me sudeshe ne tsende tunda chunjuche kebendo chunjuche tunda ya pe melitik basa jare kab ganga yungra kondo che chado che ganga yung o tichena ne tikbo chembu sawyora o inde tenjuni ga tsela longme ba yela kombe tsende na shendo tunda te metse de pesa chembu re sam metse de tsende tunda togo tunda chibu chochu na mandire sam ro tenjo yega kite 자서 개와 치마 편제 tunda tumne tuptu yo라 어디 tunda chimbu tuye yo래 삼개월아 삼고 yo라 tenjo yega 셀라 로마 어디 뒤주시다 요 말다 삼 계대 개와 치마 편제다 쳇딜레 편게 개 치마라 편게 어디 추디시 오래서 요라 대전이가 철로놈 봐 일고 배 최대 나셔도 오세 요 디시구나
So, as the Master Je Lama Tsongkhapa has said, by cultivating in mind that this human life is so hard to find, yet has no time to spare, preoccupations with this life will cease. By contemplating repeatedly the truth of karma and samsaric suffering, preoccupations with the next life will come to cease. As you habituate in this way, and when not even an instant of admiration arises for the prosperities of cyclic existence, and when the thought aspiring for liberation arises day and night, at this point, renunciation has arisen. And so here, our life, what we have right now, has all of the kind of freedom, all of the conducive conditions to be able to accomplish the Dharma. And this is something that is extremely difficult to find. It's difficult to find because it's difficult for us to create the causes that lead to such a rebirth. I mean, to do non-virtue is quite easy, quite natural for us, but to avoid that, to really make an effort at accomplishing virtue is something that takes effort. It's difficult for us. And so because it is rare to accumulate all the causes for such a rebirth, this kind of rebirth itself is something rare. And here, if we had cultivating in mind that this life is so hard to find, yet has no time to spare, if it were the case that we could be certain we would live for a certain amount of time, then maybe we could set aside, okay, I'm going to now do my worldly stuff and then I'll get to my Dharma. But we have no certainty, even if we might live 100 years. For most of us, many of those have already passed, and there's no certainty about the time of death. We could die at any time. And so to work only for this life, thinking only about whatever kind of gain we might get, and being willing to fight with others, to cheat others, to get jealous and competitive and so forth, only to get some sort of small profit, that's quite a waste. So here we should recognize again that this life is so precious, it's so difficult to find, but we shouldn't use it just for sort of filling our belly and taking care of the needs of this life alone, but rather we have the ability in this life to think about something beyond that. And so while we recognize that what we have is precious, by seeing that there isn't much time, we don't have infinite time, and the time of our death is uncertain, this makes us do something now, do something that is meaningful.
Oh yeah, well challenge. Oh yeah, this and that wa. Tenjo nyega chela lo me ba se o teacher. Ta yinda ti ya te se yo mara. Sende tonda tu gu mare se yo mare. Sende tonda tu gu yo de. 가르스네 벤조 매나 사야 통에 대해서 강가 튕긴 좀바치 매나 아니 대코랑게 감자다 대코랑게 통에 냐는 최제가 삼을 코랑 코르투고 말해 근데 대개션 버려서 송고요래 가서래 가저 어디 다들 진배 롱주 팀지대 세세라 산제 좀 되게 당부 손도 집에 동성요래 가르송거에서나 미션달이야 펜도치야게 세고 내면에 소바 교부터 소리야 로바치 송거래 가르선 텔레테네 제마랑 펜조 전부 용거래서 최치마들에서 거라 어디 중앙에나 안에 그 소화기 강에 연구 말해 소화 강에 마용이나 최고 삼로 당에다 되게 고급 연구라 대면에 배 교부셔지게는 안에 사야 통해 고란 만드네 대남도 세제 삼로 당 대고로 마도 텔레 가쳐와 저 삼로 고로 코트베요 말해 어디 넣고 배조 개침부대에서라 어디 넣고서 다치지 와래 그래서 교원들 그 대왕원도 시에서 미참마 대왕도 버려서 동해면도 버려서 세딜 대왕도 버려 동해면도로 대화제 기버리 주나서 강에 매버 주나서 그러 교원들 그 대왕원도 시에서 매남 대화 론조 매매라 대화 가르쳐 연구에서는 론조 사야 통해 도저 풍부 매버서 거래서라 매남 대화 론조 매매라서 밀리 대화 연구는 사야 통해 튕기된 리버시 고요라 티연에는 튕기 좀 내다 내가 대화된 리요라 어떻게 가서 매남 대화 론조 매매라 론조 간에 진련 좀 kennes 론조 종사대 천대를 미션다 랑그 로봇 제제라 저는 근데 로봇 제발 때네 네 제마데 랑리아 론조 마부 연구 시라 매남 대화 론조 매매 론조 간에 진련 좀 kennes 론조대 침바동할 때네 샬 로봇을 제어와 침발다 마부요다 되듯이 론조 간에 진련 좀 kennes 투베 담부 침베 담제도 사제 좀 되게 담부 선도 침바동을 소래 디스 침바동을 소소 뭐 요나다 침바동으로 내나야 동생 배고라 안갈 텐데 쉬는 게 텐데 쉬버도 안갈 텐데 쉬는 게 텐데 쉬버도 로봇 쉬버도 지졸 로봇 쉬버도 에네 가서라 가바이나 미교버도 로봇 쉬고 삼삼 동생 배야 되라 동생들 가제 배나 대신 배단도 거라 근데 미션다가 침바만 못하면 로봇 지졸 로봇 챙겨도 대졸 제수 이란 식으로라 되게 소소리 침바당한테 고치고요라 단대시다 또 배 숙심어 걔라 제수이랑 초동아서 갈래 겸먹어 개원 데블럽 심부 용한테 제수이랑 되지래 미션다가 야 개와야고 지금 너 빼야고래 건디가서 수남 침부에서 나마마 보나 텐데 수남 침부전에 코나시 현다 로과시에다 텐데 용아쇼 삼사 삼르다 거라 나라도 뒤삼을 만나 저 코지 야고동아 면도선 차도지 삼르다 그래 어제데 매남 대화 론조 매면 론조 진짜 특별 담보 침배 담제도 송고도 제가 그 론조의 개체부터 송고르마도 산제 그 론조 거 말에 최제제 나나나 저 저것도 나또 송고 말다 야 됐어요.
So here, as it says, this life is difficult to find, yet has no time to spare. So here, this is getting us to turn away from exclusively focusing on the affairs of this life. But the Buddha isn't teaching here that we don't need to take care of ourselves or sustain ourselves. If we are in a position of being really materially impoverished, basically we're only going to be in anxiety about getting enough. We'll only be worrying about, can I get enough to eat? Do I have somewhere to stay? We won't be able to do the Dharma if we are so preoccupied with just meeting our basic needs. And so here, it isn't saying that we should just turn away from doing anything for this life, but it's the exclusively for this life that is really being taught as something to be eschewed. So here, the Buddha also first taught generosity. It is through being generous that we are able to have in our future lives, to possess what we need. And so by being generous in the future, we won't have difficulty taking care of ourselves. So again, if we are so desperate that we can't feed ourselves, we can't find a place to sleep, there's no way that we can do Dharma in that kind of situation. So we all want to be happy. We all want to be free from suffering. And as Chandrakirti has said, based upon the teachings of the Buddha initially taught generosity because that is what brings about having our material needs met. And that's really the source of our happiness within the desire realm, at least our temporary happiness. And so to have the kind of requisites for this life, our having enough, being able to sustain ourselves comfortably, comes from having been generous. So really, there are different types of generosity we have talked about before, but whether it is being materially generous or generous in other ways, this is how we are able to ensure that in the future we have enough. And so if we are able to actually be generous, give materially, we should do that. But even if we are not able to, we should train our minds in this attitude of being able to give away, increasing and developing that sense of being able to give without any kind of reservation. And when we see others engaged in generosity, we should rejoice in their generosity. As Jilama Tsongkhapa has said, rejoicing is praised as this like supreme way to make merit. It's quite easy for us. When we see others doing something that is positive, like a great act of generosity, we should rejoice in that. Think, oh, wait, may I be able to one day engage in such generosity. Now, usually we often fall into the path of jealousy. Instead of sincerely rejoicing in the good that others do, we think like, oh, why can't I do that? Instead, if we have an attitude of joy and rejoice in the good that others do, we ourselves can increase our mind of giving, of generosity. So generosity is taught at the beginning because we need to have enough. When we talk about not having an exclusive focus on this life alone, it isn't saying that we just turn away from taking care of ourselves or getting what we need, but rather to only focus on this life is problematic. We do need to have the material needs met in order to be able to practice the Dharma.
Cho nên tài sản nó rất quan trọng. Cho nên Đức Phật không nói là không cứ lo cái việc tu tập, không có lo chuyện kiếm tiền để đói thì cho mặc đói. Mình sẽ bị sống trong cái thiếu thốn để tu tập. Điều này Đức Phật không dạy như vậy. Đức Phật dạy rằng là tài sản nó cũng là một phần trong cái cuộc sống hạnh phúc, cho nên chúng ta không từ bỏ tất cả, nhưng mà cũng không vì cuộc đời này, vì tài sản mà chúng ta phải dốc hết cả cuộc đời vào cái việc kiếm tiền.
Kuma kuya da jakju shaya da me shaya da kanga chen mangbo yungu da suwa tenje yagbo yana tenje rang chiga mardo saya tongya yana mena uto ni kare na chi chiga ra me shaya kona shaya kare na chi chepan rama da yungu da tsudab o ti indi ta ko yangda chowa kya kure sungu da yangda chowa lokbe chowa ti ina lokbe chowa rindu wara che da me tenba me le chowa chebe kone penjo dugu cheche susu sudab tere ina ne lokbe chowa sigyo o tende chigyo marse yangdakbe chowa te chendele rangi kiba ta maho bada milio tobya ta dewan jimaya kyuyin sungudwa yangdakbe chowa te mezi kedan te chodan timba mili chowa meba timda timba lungba ina timda timba chaya da ku ta chene ne yangdakbe chowa kegora mezi de yangdakba susu kale kep chodan timba chong jabe na ko chong jab kirwa jab chow yore chidang chong jab chow na pendo yore chidi chil paake kombo yose bebu yose de kombo paake yama mi tunji trewa wachi yora te kepsan de toz de saura ko chowa ke ora te timda timba chena kyo mare rabdu chung chane ina pole mangbo yobache michil pole mangbo yobache niko rabdu chung ne tawa chewe na tela chong jabe na sanje me pole trewa se me pesha ko se chene ko rabdu chung stand dream mare se tela mixe na ki ora chong jamna de res telia 총접세 미 볼런트 바트에 그래 지단 결론 총접 처우 말아 근데 총접에 처우도 어디인데 소화 양다 버시 깨야 돼 최대기 가래 그래도 최시대 현다지 깐장마도 소소 매지 야보시 팀도 깨야 돼 최에게 삼기 말아 어디 쳐도 팀버티리 와도 양다베 소화세 lokwe tsoa memba she o te sonda penjo che mena ni ata be tsoa yo do yo maro o te sonda ti ke chibure yo te ji sonda ya.
So here again, if we don't have sort of conducive conditions, at least materially, we are likely to engage in wrong livelihood, like stealing from others, taking their things, lying, cheating, in order just out of desperation to get what we need. And so we need to rely upon right livelihood, not acting in ways that are harmful to others or using sort of communal property that belongs to others. We should conduct ourselves in a way where we are not harming others, where we are not cheating them or stealing from them. And this includes acting in accordance with the laws of the land, giving your taxes, paying your taxes. And so we need to engage in right livelihood. I mean, most of the time, business is something that is necessary in order to get goods to places that they need to go. And the person who engages in that needs to make enough in order that they can sustain themselves. Not crazy profits, but they do need to be able to take care of themselves. So there's nothing wrong in engaging in, say, commerce in order to support yourself. It's said that, like, if someone, say, takes out a bunch of loans and then tries to avoid that by becoming ordained, well, actually, they are allowed to engage in business because it's important that they repay those loans. They can't just sort of use becoming ordained as a way to escape that. So we often don't think about Dharma as being related to the way that we sustain ourselves, but right livelihood is an extremely important part of the practice of Dharma, engaging in a way that we have to sustain ourselves, we have to take care of ourselves and have a livelihood, but it should be done in a way that is not harmful to others, that is not cheating or stealing from others. Because again, if we're materially desperate, if we're in those kinds of straits, we can't do the Dharma.
Nên cuộc sống chánh mạng là chúng ta phải sống đúng với hợp với giáo pháp và hợp với cái luật lệ thế gian, không có tà mạng. Vì cái đồng tiền mà chúng ta tổn hại người khác thì điều này không thích hợp. Đây là cái cuộc sống mà Đức Phật đã dạy là phải sống chánh mạng.
야, 진짜 어때니 띵이바데 티케체 보래. 진짜 추tumse 니바들 추tum성으로 와. 당부들 심바데 손테니 니바들 추tum성으로 계신 것이. 추tum세에 미개와 주봐야 돼. 샹라 쳐와 봐야 돼. 소소 메시게 동달이야. 샹라 쳐와 지겨라. 소소를 개변지 두에 동달 샹라 쳐와 지겨라. 어디 방구래서 거라. 샹라 쳐와 방구래. 소저발라 소바 마침발레발라 소바타 카레나 샹라 네베 리스큐바티 강가 방구래서 거래. 들려 추tumse 거래. 팀 미개 주본 게 추tum되래. 어디에 진짜 추tumse 쳐와 방구도 와. 대강 등인이데 최공원에데 디나 되거라. 나도 최공원에서나 샹라 펜바 두에데 집에 동안서데 소교발라 소바 망보 연구라 디나라. 진짜 샹라 펜바 두에데 연구라. 들 샹라 펜도 셰데 연구라. 집에서 뒤쳐배 펜도 망보 지어라. 근데 추tum 되게 샹라 쳐와 방바데 연구라. 소소원에 진행이 샹라 펜바 두 근데 진행이 샹라 쳐와 소소 쳐와게 동달 샹라 내가 맞춰서 근데 진짜 쳐려고 다 쳐간 되나 되더라. 잠바스도 하시되 샹라 펜바 두에데 샹라 펜심 지어라. 샹라 쳐와 방바데 샹라 내가 방바데 지어라. 어디 잠바다 짜와 시선 거라. 잠바스도 코 대화 전화서 코 기부 전화서 거라. 저 로봇에데 샹라 펜도 시도 지어라. 처바도 어디 전에 콜 내가 이거 콜 강에 연구를 동에 연구를 틴득 말을 삼거라. 짜와라 시선 거라. 동에 대도 짜와라 시선 거라. 어디니 얘들 다 쳐나 되게 해서라. 펜도 받아 샬라 펜도 받아 샬라 차와 방방이데. 등이 야보시 영어 거기에나 다 서버 공부를 서버들 서버 성구도 와. Saba Kongre Sore, Saba Magumna Tingi Yomare. Susupa never much and then some two never cheba yon sigra. Susu sem samba nashi sama yongumara. Or to do something condu che sem two chairs mare. To do Saba Kongre Songuada. Saba Magumna, Shala saw upon Pemba to bring it to yon two matters, Sumba de la ticket symbol, Saba Comet Songuada. Or Saba come to an end. Pemba Truba da Chaba Mani the Lamlu Trude, Ningiring Medicinal Koyar Yardura. The man a condu sasa condu Chawabasa Chawachena, Churcha, Tegiomara, Chur said the Konam Samlatanta, Chulam Chana Yonguara, or the Ducasoda. Chinda Chutum Savase, take somebody Tambeche Lamga Chambudi in Soda. Simbadan Chutum Savasubade. Chinda Chutum Sosawa, Tamju Lambuches, Tambechi Lamduchembuch, Lamga Chambutin. Tell a Maguba Chena, take care Malena. And the Shandaji Kaleka Sobol, Sawachu, Sobolia, never Mamu, Kalama Sebachete, Roa, Church of Greece, Church of Greece, Calabas, Sobochu, Chichu, and Sobol Nature, the Madribitis of Guara. They look well on the show with this because it didn't do it all. Mambuchi and this and Tabatova, social collector with a Tibata with us. Nesobola collector, Kalam Masep, Kalam, and it's a Chutangolia, Sobotu, Tabot, Tungan Cheda, Roa, or Tindi Mambu Gudua. Tezuchi Gilmarso, till I'm got orders of Gudua. Chinda Chutum Susawa, Tamju Lambusilaka, Maguse. Le Dong, Lulia Kangete, and Titi what I in Sabina, the Mandiri, the Lopa de Sagara. Ludia was a soldiers, so Tanda Yoga, I was in the any church, Ramado, Lula Caleta and Tibetagi and Asera. Then Tanto to pay, Tunga Mambo Yonchura, she got up doing a concert over there. And it's Chula treat and the Tibetagi and the Chuna again, Yada to the and the Tibetata was Sonora. So I could. So we talk about the Jenny tree kept the Tagamato. Tibet the same chair, so or the Tibetago and the same Chamba that saw Samba Sambo Sambo Chenanga Sambo Nambashe Tibaka Tadu. That also Samba Sambo Jevina, be some much as some Simja Samata Sambo Jevina, Tangema Nambashe Tibetadu. Tibetago Sungua. Or the Tatanda, we are teaching on the Judah.
So the Buddha then second taught ethical conduct. First, he taught generosity, such that we might have the material possessions, the things that we need, and then taught ethical conduct. In order to be able to secure a good rebirth, we need to abandon those 10 non-virtuous actions. We usually engage in non-virtue because we want some sort of small profit for ourselves. We think that we are getting what we need. And again, if we're materially impoverished, we might feel even more compelled to do non-ethical things in order to really get what we need. So here, after having taught generosity, the Buddha then taught ethical conduct. And really, the actual genuine Dharma can be encompassed by these two, doing things to benefit others and this ethics of non-harm. Really, generosity is about benefiting others both materially and non-materially in other kinds of ways. And it really is the foundation of Dharma, this sense of love and compassion for sentient beings that is embodied in the abandoning of the harm toward them and doing as much as we can to be of benefit. So it is on this basis we say like, oh, this is something that will be helpful to others, therefore I'm going to do it out of my sense of wanting them to have good, and recognizing, oh, this is something that will cause them trouble, will create suffering for that other being. doing. And out of a respect for that, you avoid such inaction. And in order for these two to really be successful, we then need the practice of patience. This is what is taught third. Although we might try to act well toward others, there will be times when they do harmful things to us, and we need to be able to bear with that. If instead we just let ourselves be as we are, we let ourselves be angry, we let ourselves fight with others, we let ourselves get jealous and prideful and so forth, there's no way that we will be successful in the Dharma. This is really, these three are referred to as sort of like the highway of the Dharma. This is the main path. If we think that there is something separate and apart from that, without this foundation of benefiting others and wishing and abandoning all harm toward them, we are really mistaken. It's not like we can just remain acting in the same way that we are, having our mind have the same negative thoughts, and think that we can do some kind of Dharma. Really, this is the foundation, the basis of all Dharma practice. And so this includes not engaging in things like austerities that we think will somehow purify our negativities, like by doing some sort of like inflicting torture on our own body, thinking that, oh, well, it is through, starving myself that I'll be able to purify my negativities and get rid of karma, or doing some kind of washing or something. That is not really the practice of Dharma. If it were the case that water could wash away our negativities, then fish would be set. They would be totally purified. There would be no need for them to do anything else. But rather, it is only through doing good toward others, doing things that are beneficial, and avoiding actions that are harmful, that we can call what we are doing Dharma. Any sort of just inflicting pain or torture on our own body, that's actually against the Dharma, because we too are a sentient being and should avoid harm toward ourselves. So here, it's essential that we recognize what is the actual basis of Dharma, and it really, the practice of generosity encompasses that side of love, of wanting to benefit others, and ethics, the restraint from doing harmful actions, and patience is what allows us to be successful in those practices. So these were taught at the beginning, and we shouldn't look down upon them or disregard them, because really, other than that, there is no Dharma. It's encompassed in these two attitudes of having love and compassion and wish to benefit, and a restraint from any sort of harm toward others.
Tại vì những người mà không xem trọng cái con đường lớn là bố thí, trì giới và nhẫn nhục, thì hành hạ thân thể để tiêu tội, những người đó là họ đang đi trên con đường sai lầm. Cho nên khi tu tập là mình không có nên làm cho thân mình khổ đau, hành hạ thân thể. Nó không phải là con đường giải thoát. Nếu giả sử như mình hành hạ thân thể cho thân thể khổ đau như các loài vật, nó chịu khổ đau vô cùng, như vậy thì nó là những người tiêu tội sao? Nó là con đường giải thoát hay sao? Không phải là con đường giải thoát. Giống như nếu như mình tắm ở dưới nước sông để mà rửa sạch tội lỗi, thì tất cả những loài thủy tộc nó sống trong nước thì là nó là những người tiêu trừ tội lỗi hết hay sao? Cho nên dòng nước hay là nước nó có thể làm sạch những cái bẩn ở trên thân thể của mình thôi, cho như tắm để được sạch thôi. Mà tội lỗi nó đâu nằm ở trên những cái mùi hôi dơ trên thân thể, nó thuộc về cái tâm của mình, cái tâm bất thiện tạo tội. Cho nên là bây giờ muốn thực hành pháp là chúng ta phải phát khởi những cái thiện tâm, làm tất cả các điều thiện để tiêu trừ những cái tội lỗi, chứ không phải là bằng cách là hành khổ hạnh.
Oya tenjo niga tsela long meba yila kumbe tsende nangshe doos liswa. Tsende chibu ke chimbu machi bichaya chigure sidi, ta kiawa chima de ke chimbu chigiyora. Kiawa chima ke samlo tangure se. Tsende togu chibu tondali ya tikwa sakanju machi chena. Ani kiawa chima doni ya, tewa da tunga nibuti le kiawa cheba le teni, tewa yungure le megi wasana tunga yungura. Ani kiawa ngemba, Tendula Sawake, Milike, Kawake, Kutunga Mabunya, the Yungara, or Tindukarsuda. Tenjuniga Tella Lomeba Yela Combe Tendi Nanshedo, Tendi Chibuton, the member Kyo Chimal Samutagre Sera. Takewa Chimadil had a me, Kewa Sambuchi Tonasam, Titundala Migiwa Pa, Kewa Tugura, Shalla Sawapa, Shalla Pambachini Tugura. Teaching any Kewa Chima, Tendula Sawamaji, which had a milk Kewa Sambuti Tugura. 대전이가 철을 넘어봐 열고 배체대 지구 나셔야 된다네 치마 배제를 삼다 그래서 거라 다 치마 가르 삼다 치마 하다미 겨와지 톰나 야보레 삼 신델레 최주바나시 최대 양야 tum네 공내 공대 앞에 떠달라 담배 최단제 아니 밀루 톰나 하일루 톰나 하일루라 하일루라 유라야 최송게 마부여라 상기들 더 가와케나 진짜질이 겨와 돈더니 거라. 사 겨와 치마데 돈더니 소아 하다미 겨와 상부지 돈더니 소아 신대집을 마셔봐지 대 유튜브 소아 대전이가 철을 넘어 일을 꾸며쳤네. 렌데 멜로 코에 동해남 양야 삼나 치매 나셔도 쳐라. 다 겨와 치마 하다 멜리케나 치다다 녀손을 떠드다 야부시라를 뒤께 구그래. 최주발라 겨와 상부지 매나 고내 콘도야 페토 마르와. 뛰나야 서라. 렌데멜 코에 하선 치면이야. 렌데멜로 코에 동해놈 양양 삼나스데 멜레케나 동해 만부여라. 다고 삼로 체데 토르더라. 다 멜레케나야 동해 배 만부여봐. 개배 동해로 마영에는 거제된 동해냐고래. 아니 야개로네 동해 가져 제가 좀 웃음도 통대라 체들이야. 개배 동해 나회 동해로 너가 째되면 봐. 맨도바 토도 봐봐. 라. 아니 똑바다 제와 소소 가불니보다지 이동화한테도 왕매도 제대. 맨도바지 토도 봐도 동해만 보여라. 천들을 가르쳐 하고 그런 것을 토대라. 기회동에 개배동에 나회동에 치회동에 라. 아니 똑바다 제와 이동화한테도 제 카트에도 파마년 돼서 이도 명언받아 체돼. 또 받으면 돼 타다. 너 받쳐야 되면 봐. 내가 뭐 갈래잖아 만약 매드버 타도 보통에 마무여라. 아니 담아 치워라서 봐. 멜케나 야가지들에마다 동에시다 도와 삼고여라. 할레케나 코페 타드로 마로 콜레 동에 여라 야케네 야신이 야마 가와키도 된대요 마로. 렌데멜로 코에 동에는 렌데멜로 레케와다 미게와라 테네 엔드부디 겨와 상보다 대와 요거라 레 미게와 상발라 테네 겨왕에바다 동에 요거라 어때야 보지 상배나네 미다 할레 깨베이나야 야 기치 제고라 깨네 치네 기치를 라와요 말에 어때야 테네 텐도 대와 제레베도 삼제 네다 타르와 토야 기치 제메고 봐 풍부치 돌 테네 동에 냥지 텐데 제메고 봐 겨와 돌레 제메고 봐 가사시 교나 네 야고도 삼겨라 라라라메 봐 풍부 돌레 제네 동에 냥지 대고 til에 텐도 타르와치 고게 삼겨라 렌데 멜로코에 동에 남 양야 삼나 치메 나셔도스 겨와 치말 하다 미 톱나 야부 인 삼겨라 되게 디데 고 내가 최주베 땡을 고고도 마도 데 땡도 대화체를 메도아섬 다 텔레 렘베데 텔레 타라체 탑시 체고도 삼사테기 와라 렌데 멜로코에 동에는 양야 섬나 치메 나셔도스 네 치메 나셔도데 다 소설 라메바 풍분도 렌체고 봐 소설 라메바 기치체고 봐 텔레 타고 와라 디 교대 가라서는 녀모르다 네 동반이 공세도 요구하라 디 교대를 가르고 버렸으나 내가 삼장나 라오 시부치 답사 내가 저 콘조스 딱쇼다 현조서 착당하게 삼로 마부치에서도가 텔레 때는 녀모 강가 연구하라 착당한 녀모 담보소서 나가 삼상간지 숙천부시도가 되게 말아 되 시송거라 되게 짜와지는 녀모 강가 연구하라 삼라오를 삼 소소마도 삼주뱅가리지 직대 현대 가리다니 소소치부르지라 삼자라와 삼다다 근데 나에서 신자 첨부여라 나던가요 근데 나저 lokba 나저 낭면 나저 년제 나저 출루세라니 딱 졸라 착버린 거라 근데 신에서도 그 개첨부만인 게 신쇼시가 그 심지에다 뭐보다 강갈이야 고야로 야가지 신자 줘서 직세 미국의 양코치 밴드가 제사라치 니 삼로 당기도와 기지도 착당 연구하라 착당 연구소는 건조가 제 차도 강가 연구라 선녀모 방구였다 저치마 사다 미치고 고바 사다 미치와데 규니 야 슈트네 아니 타르바 토바시고라 동엘레 땐도 타르바 동엘레 땐도 타바시고라 어디 숨거라 레데 멜로코에 동에남 양양 삼나 치메 낭샤도스 치메 사다 미치와라 신자티에 도르고라 대견데 삼탄데 다 텔레 마보도 삼 텔레 타르고도 삼다 가르쳐버렸네 대규디 녀모 방고야래 착당 방고래 신자 뭐 카실레 숙심부 신자 제셔라 카실레 당원 제셔라 어디 녀모 방고라 텔레 동반 예세야 돼 티제 방부 셰도 어디 검고야라 어디 시켜나 돼
So here, by cultivating in mind that this human life is so hard to find, yet has no time to spare, preoccupations with this life will cease. And so here, again, it's preoccupations with just this life, just getting enough food and so forth. If we are willing to do harmful actions to others, this is really not something that is good. So although we need to sustain ourselves, having a preoccupation with this life and only thinking of this life is the way that we end up doing non-virtues to get those things we need. And then this verse continues by saying, by contemplating repeatedly the truth of karma and samsaric suffering, preoccupations with the next life will come to cease. And so here, recognizing that our happiness and sufferings are the result of karma. When we think about the fact that we have to take a rebirth after this, we start focusing on, oh, I need to get a good rebirth in the future as a human or a god. But even if by abandoning harm and engaging in beneficial activities, you were to get a birth as a human or a god, this is something that is temporarily beneficial. As a human, we are able to encounter the Dharma, and as a god as well, there are many opportunities to listen to the Dharma, to learn and to practice. But even if one is born in the upper realms, although in comparison to the lower realms, that is something that is more pleasant, life as a human or a god is not beyond the nature of suffering. So here, as it says, repeatedly contemplating the truth of karma and samsaric suffering, we can see directly. I mean, humans suffer from birth, aging, sickness, death. We have to encounter things that we don't want to. We strive to get things that we want and we lose them. We are separated from things that we love, things and people that we love. All of the sorts of unwanted tragedies befall us. This is the nature of this life as a human. And so the fact that we have this life right now is something that is very positive. But if we just make an effort to get kind of what we need for this life, or even if we just make an effort in order to get a good rebirth as a human or a god, that is going to still be subject to suffering. A god has to change lives and is subject to the results of the karma that they have created in the past. So while virtue leads to happiness and good rebirths, and non-virtue leads to suffering and bad rebirths, the whole cycle of lacking any sort of autonomy and being subject to taking birth and dying out of the sort of following after our karma, uncontrollably having to take up aggregates and cast them off, when we see such is the nature of samsara, then we think, well, it would be better if I could avoid this cycle altogether. Although it's good to gain, it's necessary and good to gain a good rebirth in the future as like a stepping stone, as something that is temporarily beneficial for us to be able to continue to proceed toward liberation and the state of omniscience. Really, it would be best if we could get out of this cycle that comes about from first this thought of I, this grasping at an I, and then all of the kinds of afflictions, our attachment to some and animosity toward others. We have this thought of I and our side, my side, and then the other, and so forth. So out of I and mine, we really give rise to all of the other afflictions. And so this is where the meditation on emptiness arises, in that we cling to these things. We have this sense of an I, and then we think like, well, my friends, my family, my country, my area, and that's the other, my my enemy and so forth. And we cling to our side. It's like, oh, I need the best. I need to have all of the good for myself and my side. And so it is that fundamental grasping at a self that leads to all of the animosity and attachment and all of the other afflictions from which we suffer. And so if instead of continuing to cycle, instead of continuing to uncontrollably take up aggregates and cast them off, it would be best if we could gain a definite freedom from that cycle of suffering. So here, as it says, by contemplating repeatedly the truth of karma and samsaric sufferings, preoccupations with the next life will come to cease. So clinging to the idea that a higher rebirth alone would be happiness, we need to get rid of that and instead recognize that all of our suffering comes from the afflictive emotions. And if we were able to eliminate the kind of grasping at an I, this I is existing sort of somehow in and of itself, and then the sort of attachment, clinging to our own side, and animosity or hatred for the other, if we could remove all of those, then we would end this cycle of uncontrollable rebirth. And so this is the way in which this kind of contemplation allows us to cease preoccupations with the next life of just wanting to get a good rebirth as a human or a god, and instead spurs us to pursue a state of liberation.
Những khổ đau ở đời này đời sau, đó chính là cái lòng tham chấp, muốn loại trừ cái sự tham chấp và chấp ngã và chấp
No,
thực đó.
golden raisins are exactly for the lung.
Oh yeah, what is? Oh, teta kombe koe pendula
That's okay,
starta
because
hada mili
it's not
kena tunge
necessary.
mabudu samche. Ne ta koa la ke chinje tela. Le ta nyomu be wangi pumbun dole che ko be chinje tele ya. Kawa kena tunge chima do medu samgora. Sayombu kachin de che kene ro. Samdengi la du ne pesum soba lu pesum soba ne go tunga tunge che me de che ora. Ta ina ko ya tene ton le to suna ya shandal ke do gora. 어째서 다 대주 참말에 타로지 그것도 삼겨라. 대다 공배 코에 편조라 코에 표숨 써봐 내 표숨 써봐 내 표숨 써봐 longe 표숨 써봐 간대지 연아야. 로 개진다 참발라 써봐 라이드 가라서도 메다 베직데컴 이거 표숨 써봐요라. 내가 류도 longe지 동해지 맹게를 내가 그런 거 동해지 맹게를 지와라. 다이나 콜레드 조선의 야께와 질랑지 야가와 기도네 텐데게요 말아. 텐데 삼을탄디다. Teta kombe koe penzo kandeche leta nyomombe wage kiwa che lang chinche tela ti ne ina da lu ina da lonju ina da kari ina tempo rebendo sam tungele tendo tawa che mare sam ya te zule shencha rabche te de gara ta inde ta koe tungele tendo tawa che koe sam gyora teta kombe koe penzo la yimi kechi sam yishe koe pesum soba kandeche ina ko ninjung kom sona 중내 제라 세담번에 시세라 주배 중계지 나서 나한테 콜 칼라테나 딜레장 좋은 거라 그 가요 말아 어디나시 쳐야 시세라 레다 녀뭐 게 라다 위다 강게 상부 컨디션에 중내 제라 세다 다티 텐트 대와메 텐트 대와메 섬 네번 정도 와라 네만 섬로 파차 되베데 야부 인삼도 답에 출로네 다 야부 메 섬텔레 네바도 주는 라르 너버메바 ninjung segda pe tate yabure mendo sampe lar mendo besiki yanja yabure sha samsa tae me besavora ninjung sora ninjung se koale ngeban josuna ta tungele tendo tarban digora tarba segora tele nyomo kanga pangsona chagdala sobe nyomo kondunga jela sobe tesu sama pangsona ne tarba togora oya tichtuna indigira.
So, as it continues, saying, as you habituate in this way, and when not even an instant of admiration arises for the prosperities of cyclic existence, and when the thought aspiring for liberation arises day and night, at this point, true renunciation has arisen. So, here, contemplating in this way, you say, well, from the point of taking up and casting off these aggregates due to karma, all of that, every birth that is driven by that is in the nature of suffering. suffering. And so there arises this thought of needing to get out of that. One doesn't feel any kind of admiration for the prosperities, the excellencies of cyclic existence, whatever sorts of nice things, whatever good kind of rebirth one could take, whatever sort of enjoyments one might have within that rebirth, even if one is born as like Indra or Brahman, these really high sort of positions that seem as though they are in the nature of happiness, that's just something temporary. One will have to move on once that karma is exhausted and experience again renewed sorts of sufferings. So whatever kind of excellent things we might have, whether we're thinking about our body or our possessions, the abode that we are in, none of that is stable and lasting. So when we have come to really turn away from any sort of admiration for or clinging to the prosperities, the good things within cyclic existence, this is when we give rise to an attitude of renunciation. Like someone who is really nauseous, who has some sort of stomach disease and is very nauseated, whatever they look at, like food, isn't going to seem attractive to them, right? It's something that makes them want to throw up. And so too, when we have contemplated in this way, looking at all of samsara, we should feel that same kind of like nauseated sense of, oh, I want to get out of this. This is a thought of renunciation. It's not feeling any attraction toward those excellent, whatever it is of samsara, body, possessions, wealth, status, but instead say, I want to get out of this entirely. I want a definite freedom from all of this. And this entails ridding yourself of all of the various afflictions. This is the attitude of renunciation, wherein you have this conviction, I want to get out of this cycle of suffering, and thereby pursue eliminating your afflictions from their roots. This is the attitude of renunciation.
Oh, that tunda juna de zingi ju geba tunda koe tungele tarwa chegu samsam samlo chigi ora. De inde sosu chibu koe tungele tana diga mare sam chedi pada mada nye dule soba konzo tungele tawe tabshi nge chegu re samsam samlo kogi ora. Ne simje tamje rangi pada mada nye du kyo thoma yo mara kyo ala thoma mede kyo me pama nye du tinga ma mide chike na lale ke na karina ko nye de da chi te yongura o te inde kyo ala thoma meza simje tamje chende pada mana shi majuba che yo mara ro sata ina da pu putu ina da te kaje che ba chi so so be kaje chende la kashe da kare ina tina shi majuge simje che yo mara samge ora te inde ta samlu chunju kya chunju ta ne so so chibu da so so nyende chibu se ba do chama nyende re de sha samge ora kyo thoma meza pamar jube simje tamje nye du jube simje tamje ge to dugwe ene ka so kunzu kangala koe tongele tarwa chiche kudu sam tende che tumgengi sosu kasa chi chaku sam gyora rankyon ku se yende kunde sanje je koba toba chagos ngaro de nangba chena ko sosu semde pe yagu chi wara kyon de pa meba sune meba swe yende chu tumne tuye yuba chi de te wara tende ngarazo kanga sanje je ru yusu wara ngazo sanje wara nangbe lolo sanje kunjo tu changma 당분 이내 상계제비시 랑주지 요 말에 당분 내신 당분 알아서 내신 제네 깔래 좀 야르 신이야 탈신로라 어디 내신 알아서 줄줄 요삼 단대 소소 삼로 가지고 가와 텐데 주에 요 말에 삼겨때 이나 가지고 매주 전에 줄투 그래삼 교환에 교와 깔래 잡고 삼 천대 천에 마음 바나 깔래 잡지 상계기 고바 토바 잡고 삼 그래 떼고서 연대 군대 상부 타르심바 라 랑도르 전에 시베 시럽 타르심바 어 근데 중간에 심제 상마가 던다 트루트우라 템바 트루트우라 어 근데 저 토바차게 인삼 대체도네 대템베치 주주라 소바 근데 송베 잠바다 니지 자주 세 동반에 도고 시럽라 소바 대졸레 테바체 사바체 콤바치게 인삼 kulno setam ne sambashos 어 근데
So here, that kind of thought of wishing for liberation, saying, I want to get out of this cycle of suffering, well, that attitude of renunciation is really quite, if we only think about ourselves, is quite narrow-minded. Really, all of these other sentient beings, we can think of the loved ones that we have in this life, our mothers, fathers, our friends, our family, our partners, and so forth. They too are in this situation of suffering, this cycle of suffering. And when we think about it, it's not just this life that beings have acted towards us with such kindness, but we have had lifetimes since beginningless time. We have taken birth after birth. There's no beginning to this. So looking at our past lives, all manner of beings have acted toward us with this great kindness as our partners, our mothers, our fathers, our friends, our loved ones. And so, however, we might wish for our own liberation alone. That's really unsuitable. It's such a narrow-minded kind of an attitude. But when we look at these beings who have shown us such great kindness, who we feel such love toward, we think, I need to be able to free them as well. It's not sufficient to just pursue my own liberation. But if I were to become a fully enlightened Buddha, a being who has removed all faults, who has developed all good qualities, brought love and compassion to their culmination, as well as knowledge and insight, then I would truly be able to benefit others. And so here in Buddhism, the mind is really seen as something wondrous, amazing. It has this capacity to develop and become a Buddha. Each one of us has that potential, our Buddha nature. And so it's not as though the Buddha was always from the beginning a perfected being that was somehow self-arisen or in and of himself just always perfected, but rather he began with a mind just like ours. And due to developing these good qualities, he brought them to this culmination in Buddhahood, taking kind-heartedness to its zenith, taking the knowledge to its highest point, removing all faults and developing all good qualities. And so as we too also have this potential, we should think that, well, I am going to approach the listening to these teachings from the Guide to the Bodhisattva's Way of Life, which teaches these things like love and compassion, bodhicitta, emptiness, and so forth. And in order to pursue that state in which I would be able to be of most benefit to others, I'm going to listen to these teachings with a mind to put them into practice and become a Buddha for the benefit of all sentient beings. So we should set such a motivation, thinking in this way, set our motivation for listening to these teachings from the Guide to the Bodhisattva's Way of Life.
Biết làm những gì nên làm và có khả năng để loại bỏ những gì nên loại bỏ, và cái tâm tốt đến tột đỉnh để hoàn toàn viên mãn. Cho nên vì muốn đạt được một cái nhân vật giống như vậy, nên muốn thành Phật đó, cho nên con đủ khả năng để cứu vớt chúng sinh, cho nên con sẽ nghe bài pháp này, nghe bài pháp lòng từ lòng bi, phát tâm Bồ đề và thực hành những cái pháp này để có khả năng để đạt được cái quả vị Phật. Nên vì cái động cơ đó chúng ta lắng nghe bài pháp ngày hôm nay.
Rāngshīngi trūpāsa. Rāngshīngi trūpāyina ko kyūdān kien kūyō mā, Korāng rāngshīngi trūpāyā rā. Korāng rāngu tsūtāni ko kyū mē kūyā chā rūpāyā rā. Rāngshīngi kiawāyina. Tēmbā trūpāyā kiawāsa, tēmbā trūpāyā kiawāsa nā kyū kūyō mā rā. Rāngshīng tāni chūmī tāni shāla tēpā mē bāi sūdā. Tsāwāshira kūyā. Rāngshīngi trūpāyina, kyū kī chū kū mā rēs, shāla tēpā kū mā rēs. Rāngzū kārī na ngōbō 예동화이나 예동묘화이나 자르시나 년르시나 랑신기 투투베 고 랑신기 드라이버를 통구라 나라도 소소 셈기파 따네 다당예 소위 삼사 삼기 말아 고라 랑신기 고 드라이네 예동묘 이 고랑 거네지 조구조서 이거를 봐 데르샤세르 봐 저래 자고 랑신기 투바티 요 말은 우마바샤나 데 우마 땡겨와서 들로와 주대 탈도 되래 다 주대나는 토쇼되라 대시 두도 오마도 랑신지 여서라 어디에 지하고는 야보지래 선제 좀된 대게 그 거리 가사 마블이야 랑신지 여성샤비와라 다 여서 랑에 다 여러 다세 그래서 심제대 감도 삼바 강가 챙겨와라 근데 그다 요 말에 랑에 다도 요 말에 세셔나 콜 펜발에 너버체 용거래 그 시다체 내가 가게 면도 와서 체달 용거래 내 좀대다 치 가게 요서 말았음 체달 용거라 뒤에 뒤에 컨디션도 요르다 다 요래 이말로 땡어도 치르바 자갈에다 땡어도 주다 마보요라 계속 참마게 다 요래서 라와가 다데 딱봐 찍부 라와 딱지 라와 저기다 나로 요래서 요라 치료데 소보를 풍부를 다데 나로 요래서 시고라 자 되네시 여바 시샤치고라 산제를 컨디션도 다 요래서 풍부간에 쿠로서 풍부가보데 소보데 쿠르나시를 독제나시를 대나로 공개 가사데 나로 요래 다 소샤래 풍부간에 쿠로 쿠쿠아보네 가사고서 풍부데 소보데 독제나시를 와 대 독제 경계데 나로 요래 다데 나로 요래 소샤래 아니 콜로 되고 요래 다가 요래 삼사 디로 데 메르세션에 거 지그네 야오용이 엄마라 어디데 다 해소사 요래 카샬이야 다 여메 컨디션도 내 맞아주시거래 그 여선에 지되게 말은 매선에 지되게 말은 그 감다 삼박강가 챙겨오라 그 여선에 단다 딱다 예배나 시단다야 딱다 패네 다 시부지라고 시부지나 샤두라 매선에 그 체달 로드냐가 요라 아니 그 방송에 제 수요래 내 맞아주시 수요라 어디데 요라 단내도 롱게도 잘하네 다 라오베 다요 말다세 풍부가를 때네 딱 받sam래 네 소소가가 섬겨마도 나스도 시라지 째네 거기에 나로 여대게로 치료 여대게 소다치 째네 니에 여버치 요 말다세 풍부가지 요를 때네 딱 샤버레스 송겨라 때네 딱 받sam세 어디시교네야
So here, as for where we are picking up in the text, this is really dealing with a refutation of inherent establishment or inherent existence. So if something exists inherently, then it doesn't depend upon anything else. It has this kind of existence in and of itself, this objective existence. Now, usually the way that we think of various objects, ourselves and others, like we see our enemy, and that enemy seems to be inherently existent. It's really like that from its own side. But according to the Prasangika school, or the consequentialist school of the two Madhyamaka schools, and of all of them, this is really the highest philosophical school. They would say that no, there is no such inherent existence. This is something that is merely designated. When we search, we can't find some kind of inherent, we can't find the thing. Now, here, lower philosophical schools all assert that there is this kind of inherent existence. Like you could point to something that is the objective basis of designation. And so here we need to understand the kind of skillful means by which the Buddha taught. There are times when he talked about, oh yes, there is this kind of autonomous self. He recognized that if he were to teach there's only a merely dependently designated self, that this individual would have wrong understanding, that they would fall into a kind of nihilism, thinking that, oh, there's nothing whatsoever, karma doesn't matter. And so if we think about the context in which the Buddha taught, prior in India, there were many assertions about the self, and many asserted that there was a kind of permanent, unitary, autonomous self, like within the aggregates aggregates are kind of like the burden, and there's like an inner self that is the bearer of that burden. So this is the way in which the Buddha sometimes teaches about the self. But this is something where if the Buddha were to teach to a particular individual, we all have different inclinations, different dispositions, different ways of thinking. And if they were to be taught that there is no self, out of fear, they might turn away from any kind of Buddhist practice whatsoever. And there are times when the Buddha, say, was asked about the nature of the self or the person and didn't give an answer, recognizing that if they were to say, oh yes, there is a self, an inherently existent self, there's a danger of that person then sort of reifying that, holding to the existence of such a self. But if the Buddha were to teach this person, oh, the self doesn't exist, it's something that is merely designated in dependence upon the aggregates, there's a danger of them misunderstanding that and falling into nihilism. So for those individuals, the Buddha didn't give a particular response. Here, according to the Prasangika Madhyamakas, or the middle way consequentialist school, they would say that the self is merely designated on the basis of the aggregates. If you search within those, there's nothing you can find, nothing you can point to say, oh, this is the self, or something that is the kind of we can point to as being that thing. However, that doesn't imply its utter non-existence. So here, in this refutation of inherent existence, really inherent existence is something that isn't dependent upon other things. If something is inherently established, it doesn't depend upon causes and conditions. It doesn't depend upon parts or our labeling mind. And here, that is what is being refuted. According to the Prasangikas, we don't need to have some kind of inherent existence for things to function and exist. If we search for the thing designated, we can't find it, but it's a mere label, a mere name, and that suffices for existence.
Ngài là một đấng toàn giác toàn tri.
This one, more deep shadow. Yeah. Đó là để nàng tin là lâu đó nó. Đó cả cái cho rằng sinh gì, chú bà các bác sĩ đó, cho rằng sinh gì chú bà các bác sĩ, tin là lâu sang đi cái đó cho ngô cái này rồi, su tra thì rồi lo đó là sao vậy, tên đó là sao vậy cái này, sinh động là sao vậy, ngài ra chút sang mà chỉ gọi ra, chú lệ chú ta kiến lệ tên chỉ gọi ra, đó chú ta kiến lệ tên chỉ gọi đi, chú ta kiến mang bố chỉ số chế này thì cái Juar which chair design the Kolugur to Yata Yogara. But the Koran dinner chi unit to Tayogo Mara, the Tangjamba Sonashi. Koran te you res urgent in the Sutayogor Sigora. Kuitus Yun Koran Sutagorese. O Tendego Maraso, Tico Rangshingi Truba. Rangwine chi yogo to some Gora, Rangwine Sutineke and you would have turned out to the Chita di Dabdoa. 세원에 앞에 못해도 제 코로나 터여버서 저거도 안 알아줘. 그 교단 깨기 나오면 코드네 기초에 약게 거마도 코로나 와전에 터야지 오마로. 이제 랑원에서도 돼. 랑신기스가 껴요 말에. 교단 깨 델네네 거부터 코트인지 줘야 나오면 거야 깨운 거마도 지금 코로나 도와주 위원회는 거기야 터야서도 지 오마로. 어디 요마를 쓰거라. 뭐랑 생기 두개 껴 가고요라. 뭐뭐 여버를 줄발라세. 뭐뭐데 교회에서 여밤 랑생기 여바지. 아니 교단 깨게 중국 말에서 그라. 뭐뭐 여버를 줄발라. 교회 그것이 시여세. 뭐뭐 랑생기 여나. 아니 교단 깨게 중국 말에. 교단 깨게 쪼고라고 쪼마로 와. 교단 깨를 때니 쪼고를 쪼고 말에서라. ngô bố nhớ bà chú bảo ngô bố ràng sinh chứ yếu na ya ngô bố chú ý sự yếu na ngô bố ràng sinh chứ chú chế yếu yếu na anh chú cũng mới đó cô ràng sinh chú thay yếu yếu ra sẽ thì cả sự gọi là nên 제부 강가데 chú ta kia cái chú chế yếu ra chú mà rồi cô ràng này chú thì chú mà rồi đó là thông đề rồi cho nên bên đó lạc bao cho cái đó trong mà thì cái đó 구조 개대자 자마 코랑 구조 개급에 소리지 요라 근데 자마 코랑 구조 개급 세월마도 그 구조 장게도 롱다 주단 개게 코랑 양부체 아니 롱제 되네 도가샤시네 구조 개급이라 드르치고라 자마 따라마다 주단 개게 쇼기 구조 개급을 코랑 랑원에 구조 개급에 말아 교진이 상선의 공글이 요거 때문에 그거도 어때나 신고부 강거래 교단께 야부 상선은 거기 거라 되게 좋은 거라 교단께 마상은 깨요 말해 당연히 알아서 랑원에 코라 랑원에 깨기 삼겨라 콘도 사사 미래진에 코 랑원에 두자지 버릇이 삼겨라 두자지 버릇 그렇게 제시하다를 좀 먼저 소소 발로 따고 삼이 삼기도 유코랑원에 랑신기 랑신기 랑원에 이동하시는 청매 이동하 통고라 야부 통고라 가셔 야가 통고라 가셔 야구 메두사 뜻이라 저 꼴로 봐 따야래 라래기도 뭐도 유코랑원에 랑신기 수 나랑원에 두 이동하 인세 정말 이동하시를 뭐도 어찌 나시래 난데 보자 뭐뭐 여바 줘발라서 뭐뭐 랑신기 여바 뭐뭐 주의도서 여바이나 근데 텔레 주의 거 봐요 말해서 주되게 뭐보다 중국어라 저거라 저마로 봐 코랑신기 쪽이네 저거요 말아 현다 손에 저거요 말아 어디서거다 뭐뭐 여바를 줘발라 주의 거 봐 지시도 주고 말해서 그래 근데 되네 매나야 주의 거 봐 지시여서 다치다 뭐뭐 코랑 왜 메시지라 뭐보다 왜 메시지 뭐보스나 되지 네베텔라 자와르 제 예베실레 뭐보시거라 자와 제 그게 매베텔이야 뭐메시거라 그다음 데마체 남과시라 다 남과시도 심차게 mem시 데마체 남과시라 데마체 남과시라 남갈이야 메도끼 말와 남갈끼베 메도스 동발끼베 메도 용마라 팅외메라 어디 남에 소야요 말해서 당고 매버줘 버려 그런 거면 인게 지금 거 보면 소야요 말해서 그래 그냥 남갈을 끼베 메도 소야요 말아 남갈을 끼고 말아 동배날 메도 끼고 말아 동발 남과 동발을 끼베 메도스네 칸에들 라요라 내가 남과 동발을 메도 끼고 말아 사다 추다 간거 거라 저 남과 동발을 끼베 메도스나 뭐메래 자오시에 개요 말아 칸에라 말듯이 어때 뭐 매버 어떤 데시나 티수 주단 개경 오버시 소에 중요해요 말을 거라 근데 되네 매나 양서야 되다 어쩌다 그 주의돼서 매배 저부터 주의할 게 요라 지다 벤조 매버데 탑시 전에 여보서야 돼요라 들으시기요 말다디 딱 봐 이게 가서는 뭐면 이게 자와 집에 때네 맹게 주래 뭐 때네 맹게 된데 거라 어디디 때네 매버데 네 주다 개게 손에 써야 요 말이스 거라 이게 기다 근데 때네 매나야 교회 거 같이 시스 어디시 교나 그 머시케션 랜도스 다
Okay, so we'll see. I think we might have skipped over a few verses here, but we will be beginning then with this verse 145. And again, this is refuting inherent establishment. And so if something exists inherently, there's no need for it to depend upon a cause. So here, what's really, and this is referred to as the kind of syllogism of refuting production and cessation from either an existent or non-existent. But really, this is getting at the idea that something that, again, when we look at production, something is produced not autonomously, like it doesn't exist inherently, but rather it is due to the coming together of causes and conditions that we can talk about the production of a thing. Now, if something has this kind of inherent or true existence, and so there are different ways of of translating this. I'll go with this one that says, if something truly exists, what does it need with a cause? If something is inherently existent in and of itself, there's no way that it is affected by a cause, right? We see that things that are functional, that are able to produce and bring things into production are dependent upon causes and conditions. It's only because of the coming together of those causes and conditions that we can talk about an effect or a result. Although it might seem to us, like when we look at, for example, flags that are like waving in the wind, it seems like, oh, that flag is just doing that by itself. It's moving of its own volition. Well, of course, that's not the case. It happens to be that it's something light and there is wind, and then therefore, when the causes and conditions come together, we see this like flag flapping in the wind. Again, the way that we perceive things is as though they had this kind of existence in and of themselves, in their own right. Like we see someone that makes us angry and we think, oh, they are bad from their own side. That person is bad, and that's why I'm getting angry. We don't recognize that, well, maybe it was due to their saying something that we found disagreeable, and now it is our mind designating them as being bad. If it is the case that, say, someone that we see as bad is inherently bad from their own side, then every single person who views them would have to see them as bad. And so too, when it comes to an object that we perceive as pleasant, if it had that kind of true existence, inherent existence from its own side, then it is that way, independent of whoever is looking at it. And so if something has that inherent existence, it exists from the start. There's no need for a cause. So here, as the first half of verse 145 reads, if something truly exists, what does it need with a cause? If something has that existence in and of itself, then why would it need to depend upon a cause? Why would it need to be affected or sort of transformed by a cause? And moreover, if something is non-existent, what does it need with a cause? So again, if something is inherently existent and exists by its own power, then what could a cause do to bring it about or to affect it in any way? But if something is non-existent or is a non-thing, is not functional, then what cause could possibly affect it? What would it do? What would make it come into existence? So here we're using the term thing, which is something that is functional, and we could talk about a non-thing or something that is non-functional, like for example, uncompounded space. That's just the mere absence of obstructive contact. And so uncompounded space can't, say, produce a flower. This is why we often use the example of a sky flower as something non-existent, because a flower, for that to come into being, is dependent upon all kinds of causes and conditions. It needs to have the seed and the soil and the moisture and the water and the heat and so forth. But something that is a non-thing, that doesn't have that functionality, there's no cause that could affect it, that could bring it into being. And so too, something that exists inherently, what could cause that to change or transform in any way? Either an inherently existent thing would not need a cause. It already exists inherently how it is, independent of any sort of cause. And if something is non-existent or is a non-thing, it can't actually function, then how would a cause be able to bring about its production? So here, this is, we have, I believe, and maybe we will go back or not, but the few verses that we have missed were dealing with the reasoning of dependent origination, and the reasoning that we are at here is really looking at a refutation of inherent production, that if something is inherently existent, a cause can't create its production, it can't bring it into being. It already exists. What does it need with a cause? And what about if it's non-existent?
다 줄게 연하처라 뭐매지 내가부터 돈내는 거부 되요래 뭐매지 내가부터 만들네 지요래서거라 뭐매도 거부래 고라 뭐매도 거부래 연하서거라 근데 뭐매게 어디 봐 마도르네 거부래 요르다 뭐매지 어디 봐 돈네 거부래 요르 스토니 되거라 당매지 어디 만들네 뭐부래 요르스나 대용 그 말에서 뭐매 뭐버스나 던진 네가시 거라 뭐매서나 던진 미니가시 거라 대니가 임바시가 말에서 거라 대리한테 두시기도 하대 가서 내가 termo 지다에서 제 뭐매데 뭐매지 뭐 만들네 뭐 누구이나 에때 뭐보다 뭐매 니가 임바래 그러봤대 영식 말에서 지다는데 많이 있어라 걔네 ngư sáng cả sĩ ta đi như vậy thì sao ngư sáng cả sĩ ngư mẹ chỉ ngồi thì phan dùn nè anh ngồi bờ đê ở đây na và anh ngồi mẹ cái ngồi thì phan dùn anh dùn sao được rằng ngồi mẹ cái ngồi dùn mà tôi tan đâu ngồi bờ đê mà ngồi sâu ra xí nè anh ngồi bờ đê mà ra xí ta chỉ như bao ngồi mà anh cái ngồi mẹ mà anh cái chỉ cha cái đó thì nó sẽ mà ra xí đấy đi chơi mà được đó ngư sáng cả sĩ yên sĩ ta đó ngư mấy cái ngồi thì phan đổ rồi sẽ ta ngồi vào đây rồi anh ngồi vào đây rồi ngồi mấy ngồi đổ ngồi mà ra cái 시차시 도와 근데 시그마를 세라 뭐보다 뭐에 가이 마이 시그마로 와 어디 시거래 아티 존한데
So then looking at the next verse here, so again, we are talking about how either something that is inherently existent could rely upon a cause, or something that is a non-thing or inherently not existent. How could that become a thing, a functioning thing? So here in verse 146, and again, I'm starting to move between translations, but if something does not exist, how can there can be no change in it, even by a million causes? How could its state exist? What else could enter into a state of existence? So here, if you have something that is a non-thing, or that is a non-functionality, even through a billion causes, how could that non-functioning thing be changed, like cast away its non-thing status and become a thing? And how could that status even be functional? Is it somehow the case that there's like a transitional state between being a non-thing and a thing? That's not possible. And so here it says, what else is that which becomes functional?
아니 뭐 임바치 주식 말 네가 임바차 그랬어. dorme나셔라. 대체 뭐에 심에 뭐에 된거 임바 네가 임바식 말했어야 돼도. 대체 뭐에 심에 나서. 뭐 여봐라 남시 줄세. 정말에 된거 임바는 줄통 말했어야 돼도. 아니 뭐 개발 마주 알았어. 뭐 개발 마주랑 뭐에 되네. 데미지스. 뭐부터 가서라. 대체 뭐에 대체 디선스. 뭐부 여바 남시 주르스자. 알레 티메드스세. 이거 딘저래. 뭐메지 내가때 단데 타마시에 타거도. 뭐메지 내가 마다나. 아니 뭐부 매베 뭐부 매바 연계 뭐부 연계지 고그레 티시그마 되시기도. 다르샤 제제 뭐에 심마이 뭐보다 뭐면이가 이거 시그마를 셔셔 어 당고보 여바 남시 교르세 어티티 이바들에도 단도 따르셔야 되는 일을 이해르셔 남시 교르셔야더라 뭐고 가서 남시 교르데 매베트나 뭐보로 마지베셔서 영매지 내가 마다나 뭐고 매배체 뭐고 매배체 니산이도 hit마다 ngobo yoba siba menasa ngobo yoba namshi jute mebe tuna ngobo majibeches tati tagla teresa ngobo ngome ngoten dorna ene ngobo reo marwase tangobo rego rakuda changobo rego tini paru telia koya ngobo maige ngome ingechi maige kura tisig maresigdo ngome tande matena ngoye yebe kamisi odan dimeta ya teze ngoye yemechete ngoye yeba namshi jutende cha ngobo kebar majurwar ngome tene dalmeje ngobo maje be konlia tene ngome da kate ma tande ngome rete ora ngome tane madena se ngobo yebe kam ngome te madena ngobo yebe tresig mar ngobo da ngome gawa de setwa oya ta tudu silam degra ya
So here, continuing into verse 147. So here again, if we're talking about, well, how could something that is a non-functioning thing or a non-thing become something that is functioning? It's not possible through just casting aside that kind of state of a non-thing that it becomes a thing or a functionality, because that entails relying upon causes and conditions. So here, if it says then in verse 147, if an existent functionality is impossible when non-existent, when does functionality become existent? How exactly is it that something goes from being a non-functioning thing, or a non-thing actually, to being a thing? Because again, it's not just by casting aside the status of being a non-thing. One has to then become something that relies upon causes and conditions. So without having been generated as functionality, it does not become separated from this non-functionality. So above it talked about the impossibility of a state that's like between being a non-functionality and a functionality. That's impossible, but it's also impossible that something be in both of those states at one time. If something has not cast away its non-functionality, how can we say that it is functional? But it can't be abiding in both of those states at once.
Tiene niga rendo rangshin ni su tanjurses ngobo rangshin inge ngome je rangshin inge chinguti geware teora ngobo sene tenje neba chawa chenge chkwara ngobo mayimba sude tenje meniba chkwara tenje neba da meniba niga inge yo mare se tandara ngobo meba jurmete ngobo de ta ngobo meba niga imba jurmete rangshin ni su tawache misibe rangshin ni tenje neba inge meniba inge chini sigmare se. Yeah.
So here into 148, it says, if it is not separated from non-functionality, an occasion for the existence of functionality is impossible, right? It has to get rid of that status as non-functional to become functional. But also the functionality does not become non-existent because it would follow that it has two natures. So again, this is getting at how something could transform from being a non-functionality, which is really something that doesn't have the ability to do something, and how could something transfer or change states from something that is functional to being non-functional, or non-functional to being functional?
Oti kasudosana tedan gagba yeme shinse ngoba yeme te cher roa deda thamjene ene kasena tato maje maganyese otire ta sama thamje tandamba trube seje maje bata manga bare sigora tandamba trube seje gagba de ranshin ji trube chingu marese tetan gagba rangshin ji truba yeba meshe tetan gagba ye meshe se ngoba ye mese ngobo truba ina te rangshin ji truba che yo marese ye mete chir Droa deda tamje nese. One nelu lonjula soba tesu samasigora. Droa ge netam lutam lonjula so de tamje ne. Maje mangani rangshi jitube suji maje bada manga parese. Kewa yore gakwa yora. Tenji rebar juwe suji kik yore. Tenji rebar juwe suji gadu yora. Atiri mato rangshi jitube kewa da rangshi jitube gakwa yomarese. Rangwene kewa da rangwene gakwa yomarese gora. Ya tichikuna tindigita.
So then we turn to here up until now has been talking about inherent production, something coming into being. And then we turn to a refutation of inherent cessation. And refuting that refutes that there could be any sort of inherent existence. And so in verse 149, this reads, "The negation does not exist in such a way, and because functionalities do not exist, all these migrators are never generated and never cease." So here, or one could say that there is never any true cessation or true existence, right? If phenomena were ultimately established, there actually could be no change. And so these migrators are not inherently generated, nor are they inherently ceased. Beings arise when it comes to like the abodes and bodies and enjoyments of samsara and so forth. They arise and they cease, but not in an inherent way, because to have inherent existence would really negate its functionality. So although we perceive phenomena to exist from their own side, they don't actually have that.
Siba koina rangshi jituba yo mare nyangelen deba ina rangshi tuba yo mare kwa to rangshi tuba me mato tharba da sanje to rangshi tuba yo ra sambe nyaga yo ra te kwa da nyade nyega rangshi ji matuba chibare che tamje ge nelu ta to de chibare de ra sishi nyamba ni to tuba se siba kwa le se ra shiwa su de tharba se ra tin nyega rangone matuba to da matuba nyambare mato Koade Rangwene Madu Tarbada Sanje to the Rangwene Truba Tender Maris at the Sishinyambanya to Truba Sida. Draw Milam Tabu Dese. Draw Ganelu Longula Sobati Sama Milam Nashi Desera. Milam Liang and Yum Korang when it's Yova Nation Milam Tangoa. Kondo Danga Jeta Devatung Kanga Chijuara, Milam Tanta Tusa. Chako Rangshi Koran Rangwene Chawachin gets you ever Nangi or Tandangone Liomara, and Nashi Omara. Nawanashi Tembari Omara. O Tinashi Sibata Shiwatu Ngaratul and Nawanashi Temba Milam Nashi Desura. Garazu Nandu Kandanangor say you Rama Chitinagiora. You ain't one at the Kandayorasana. Chasha Mambucha Lieutenant Leva Tawa some Jeremato. You Koran when I say and you was in Deresha says Chiglets to Sake Yomara. The Rangone Yobanangi or the Rangone Yobana Nashi Temba Marisora. Milam Nashi is. Draw Milam Tabu Tese. Number Chena Chushin does. Milam Tabu Temper Mabades, Temper Yona, Tonashi Rangone Yona, and that's any Raya Koresora. Chushin, she said, Chushin in the Kele Tombo de Sura. Shindo Kele Tombo, the Pata does not Tombo of Cheche, Pombo Cheche Yorako, Takura Chipi, Tombo do some such Yora. Tangones and Zaga do not the Pagua Cheche Yorako, Chishin, the Pagua, Mother, Tombo Gay Yomare. Pagua Mamboji to saw the Takura Tonde Yora. O Tinashi. Now Julia, you could not win a check wing watch. That's over the Chico. Took to the corner, talking or you to the Chiode, Tasha Chena Yomare Sigora. Or Tindico, Tasha Chena, Rangune Yomare. And the maid was the Mamare, you may said, Jitanga Tanya Travanesi Shaware. Madame Macheba. This Kele Tombo race as an order say, Tagachasha, Tagadisar, to Yosara. The Rangune Yana, Titan Tawats of the Yosedra. The Kele Tombo race. Kele Tombo Chimbu de Wasera, Titeneta was at it, Titaga Disar, Yusara. The Rangune Yomara, Rangune Yonane, Titombo de Cavando Tada, Chilo de Chitini, Papa de Tombo Mara, Ti odo ba yang chi tene pa ba re tong ma ra. Ne ko che bo de chuk to ba de me ba che da. Ya ma de so. Number 10 na chu shin da sa. Siben do de sama milam na she ra shi ji tu ba chung sa je yo ma re se ra. Ti ina ko chỉ đang chơi tham gia rang sinh cho chúng sai chạy mà rồi này á cháu chỉ cái mẹ rồi nên nếu mà chỉ cái đó phải bắt rồi lấy cái chỉ cái mẹ rồi sẽ nhiều rồi thế chỉ để bớt chúng ấy chơi có lấy cái chỉ có rồi lấy cái chỉ cái chỉ dù sai nhiều mà rồi năm cái gì này lại ba năm đứa rồi chơi năm đứa phết cái đó thì năm đứa rồi chơi chơi mà ra rồi chỉ lo bác bác rồi thong khol thong son thì năm đứa rồi chơi ra thế sao chỉ năm đứa ta sao rồi đứa sao thì năm đứa rồi ता रांगवे ने तो बेचो कि नम्रु फिंगे छि ने ते का दरेस ना ते राय यो मारे छिलो पापा मारे बा नांगे ने ते ता डब ते दे लेगा चिंगे पे मांगबो युचरे तोंडा मांगबो युचरा ओ ते जो सामा रे रे ने दे रे से चिली जुगु जो सके यो मारा मांगबो जो सो दे बते जो ले ते ने बा ता ने नम्रु शा अने ते फिर से दे नमगल पे मा पाप का चे यो रा ते ने फिंगे दा तेंगे रावा छि यो मारे राव अच्छी यो ना पकवा दे मारे से राखोलो दे मारे से तार दे मारे तांग नम्रु तांगे दे मारे से तेना यंगे से राय यो मारा ताक्सो बादा चेसो बा मेदवा इना को चावा चेगे वारे केसो कांगा अरु बरु चेसे नम्रु ना मिते यो फाके रे छु योंगे रे मा बागु रे या दो रे लेगा कता रा चेगे दवा लेगा चेबा बोदे रंगोने के यो मारे तेजे देबर जोआ चेगे लेगा चेगे वारे मामू चले तेज डेल ने चावा दे चेतो गोरा और तेरे मादो रावने तो बतले हो मादे सोरा नंबर 6 ना छुशिन दा से तेरे ये तो आसे ना आता तो तेबा में बारे ओ नि खोले सा नंबर 6 ना छुक तो बकाया में केले तोंबो ना शिंसे वो दिसतो ना
So here, then we turn to the last point in this particular section, which is establishing the equanimity or equality of samsara and nirvana. So both samsara, cyclic existence, and the state of being beyond that, free from that, that state of nirvana, are equally lacking in inherent existence. There can be a danger of our thinking that, oh, well, samsara lacks inherent existence, but that nirvana, that thing is really truly inherently existent. It's there. And so here it says then in verse 150 that states of living or migrators are like dreams, on analysis coreless like banana trees. In reality, there is no distinction between those who are and who are not emancipated or freed. So here, when it comes to the nature of samsara and nirvana, they are both equally lacking in any kind of inherent existence. They are equal in that way. And so this is like when we dream, when we are having a dream, phenomena appear to us as like they're really there. We're experiencing whatever suffering or happiness it might be. But although all of that seems quite real within our dream state, it doesn't actually exist as it appears to us at that time. And so too, it appears as though samsara and nirvana exist like in and of themselves from their own side, as if they had this kind of real, true, inherent existence, but they don't exist the way that they appear. This is sort of like the way that we might look at a plantain or a banana tree and think that there's like, oh, there's some real solid stalk there, like a trunk there. It seems as though there's something real and solid, but as soon as you go and begin to investigate, you peel off each leaf, like each layer of the sort of skin, and all of a sudden there is no stalk, there is no core there. So although it appears to us, all phenomena appear as though they like exist solidly, really from their own side, there's nothing that exists in and of itself. When we engage in that kind of an analysis, investigation, trying to look for that thing that seems to exist in and of itself, we can't actually find it. But yet we can say, like with a plantain tree or a banana tree, oh, there's a big banana tree stalk there. We can talk about its existence. However, it doesn't exist in the way that it appears, like solidly, inherently, from its own side. But that doesn't negate its sort of functionality. So here, when we, as I've used as an example, think about any sort of phenomenon, like something like a plane. I mean, we can see the outside of the plane, the wheels, the wings, and so forth, and say, oh, I see a plane. But if we were to try to find the sort of ultimate referent of that, like what is the thing that I can point to and say, oh, that is the plane? We can't find anything, right? There are so many millions of parts that make that up, empty space in which they are in, and so forth, the functioning, the beings that help it to function. And there's no inherent existence, but things function. We can say, oh, I see a plane. There are people riding in that plane. And that makes perfect sense, even though when we try to engage in analysis, there's nothing, one single thing that we can point to. We can't identify, oh, this is the referent of a plane right here. And so it is the case that nothing is able to bear analysis, bear scrutiny in the way that we could find some kind of objective existence from the side of the object. But it does all work. It all functions, right? We can talk about beings who are bound within samsara and those who have been liberated from that. There is functionality despite there not being existence from its own side. So here where it says in reality there is no distinction between those who are and are not emancipated, this is really talking about in terms of their both equally lacking any kind of inherent existence or that existence from its own side. There is nothing that we can point to that can bear analysis or bear scrutiny that will hold up to that. Yet this is, it's not the case that there is being devoid of intrinsic existence or inherent existence negates functionality. It's actually the case that phenomena can function because they lack inherent existence.
Cho nên khi quan sát kỹ như cây chuối thì cái niết bàn cũng giống như là luân hồi, nó đều bình đẳng nhau trên phương diện là không có tự tính. Nên thực chất của nó không khác nhau, cho nên là sẽ không có cũng như vậy, nó không khác gì nhau giữa niết bàn và luân hồi.
야, 단 뒤쪽 줄람나 드레바나 때도와. 어디 개첨부터 내 덤대가 보이더래. 단단 간주 제바 지기도 와 때려 시도 때 단담나 제기 와라. 랑원에 여나 랑원에 여바도 거기를 제바 지기 와라. 지단 제바 지기를 니 와라. 당에도 변한 미르치 명지 들어와. 디나를 여바체. 주지 다시 수레스나. 디르베 마르스나 틴르기 와라. 디르살레 컨트라시레도 와서 디사르다. 타니에 따바참죠. 다단데 다시 그데데선 제기되나 안에 돈담을 제라. 랑원에 두만도 제기 와라. 지다고 마다 마셔면을 디카르스 토트리 망부여라. 마시베제 똑바치고 망부여라. 뒷돈담을 제기 와마르. 타니에 따서도 말아라. 다시 스스도 수이나서 라위어 말아. ane demare diris tel tashir des ta tagen ditsare ti tanya du yutera jide tanya du tige yebe kochore ti tashin du tashi de du ditsare ti jide tanya du yebe tele cheba chede taksa marane ko misese de kari ha mago ne ti cheba chigora ti ha kochasna deres ne te ditsare tage chimbare tene takbasam jide tanya takbasam chimbare mado ko tanda tashi kares cheg marwa ta tanda deche de rangune yose tashi senge mede rangune yores rangshingi yores na rangune yone kagres ta chi chen bi zuzu se chi yokura taksu ba chesu ba sobu derwete mare ne sem derwete mare ta kawa yores cheg yora te chede do nge namji rangune yeba tongre ko kona yu kona ngone chuktu ba dechira 딱 써버렸지. 통대에 들으면 도상 나와나 시tem버면 도상 tissigora. 제바치 단테니 만도거라. 어디디나 들식도 한데. 대코나니라 제바드로스라. 대코나니라 제마체. 로 템버트 각절의 제마체 참도 그네도 오래서 나서거라. 대코나니라 제바드로에 드로세 서식수도 산점으로서라. 근데 제바체네 대코능이를 제베래 근데 제바체나 Te kona nyel ma chebare se sanjam chi kora. Sachi ti kare se kora. Te kona nyel cheban roa da metro sachi kare se na sanjam te. Mingi tanye takba tsamji machimbar. Di trashiri da se mingta ra ta ko tambu ngoshingi omara. Di trashiri se mingta sara. Ta ko sara. Mingi tanya takwa samji tanda machimne trashi teri bache. Ta trashi yindan kande resina ta ko te kona nyele cheba dugara. Trashi ngoma shimbize ba cheba tele te kona nyele cheba sigbara. Tanya do kari ima ya hama kone. Tanya tasa da hama kone te gara. Te tanya do yebe cheba sigara. Tele cheba chegara. Tanda di cheba che te o rangwene yeba. Tanya takwa samji machimba yu korangwene chi yu gore te kare sigara. Tanya taya de ten namru rese de ko ha ko de namru segreche tanda da namru kande res na ne tan namru cheba dora ठीक है जरा te kona nyela cheba ndome do saji ne mingi tanya takwa samji machimbar te samji mandibse tanda yu ngone yo de segora gobo tendu kelenge sama tera mingi tanya takwa samji chimge wa mare yu kona ngone chenshi che ne raye shi yo ko gara Machin barse te samji mandrik barse wara. Tokwe ta samai bata te tokwe pa lab samba samji drig mare ming ta pa samji drig mare. Ta se to da kare se tak ten se se to. Ming ta sa to da tokwe de chi ji re se to da kare se wara. Chilo sobol se wara kare se ta te khona nyele se ba do da. Te raya yo mare se wara. Odi. Te khona nyela che ba do sachi che ma ju sachi ne ro mingi tanya takba samji manchimbar, machimbar. Di trashi res, di kangba res, labsa raha kotsar. Tati mandi ni kangba ka res, chegta na, ni mandi re, nye yo mara. Tanya jugwe shidi chidar yu, chuen do ne, cheba na, tanya takwe shidi, takdun sikdo, mingi ta, ha kotsar, telisir. Tanyangya chegta na, takdun segyo ra. Taksa mara ne cherde takdun chegyo mara, tashi kare se tanya kora shingyo mara, tere se tere bese diksare. Tingi kaka chogura. Te kona ni cheba drombe du saji ne mingi tanya takwa, samji machimbar. Tanya do jogbe shidi chidar yu, tanya takwa shidi kandi na sa tanda chode ne chegyo na, te kona ni chebare, tanda chebare. Tene raya yo mara. Cheba na te kona nyela cheba dola, te da mimbara. Tanya takwa samji chimne, lejin, tate lejin kagire se, tere se na, ko tanya takwa samji chimne chigi wara. Ming dasa kora ngoshingi omari tichara. Tashi kare, tudu kare chisa, o dire sa, ya, o tate hako susigira. O ti tanya tugi wara. Te chimbara, tanya takwa samji chimne ko tigi wara. Tanda ngoma shanda che tanya takwa cham chengmar kansa ha ko pumbu ngabol titasa kansa de kawayo resur tanda kansa sesa de sul segi chachi tangi omar kanga ha ko ra kansa lechin chuchin ngazu kansa de so de so ko kansa kande se da kane de se yungone chi yora kansa se kawasi gore san ta te kona nyel chi gora tini raya yo mare se gore maraz namje samlu nal chi raya yo so re chi ora nga sudungachi yungone chi yana shagdo mado phungbungal tene chu takba samni samro chi modwa ti samna ne nga je da kondu tene ra yo marwa be samgi mara nga ra chi yo samgi to mata chi tare japti ne tawe ne nga ga ra nda se kon to ba chi kashi de de chi da pa de to ba chi 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 to ke yo mara kabli yo mata ke yo mara o ye ti sonne.
So here there is something in Gyaltsabje's commentary to this. It's actually the first half of this verse establishing the equanimity of samsara and nirvana that is really important for us to understand. So here to read this part of the commentary, the sort of and he says here station or the sort of boundary that decides whether analysis becomes analysis into suchness or not is really based upon on, so to back up, we need to understand that there are two levels of analysis. There is kind of investigating nominal reality, finding that things are mere imputations. Like if someone doesn't know the person Tashi, who Tashi is, for you to say, oh, this is Tashi, that other person's not Tashi, that is a kind of nominal analysis. You've now introduced them to that, and they have to be satisfied with that being a mere label. That is coherent in the sense that they, conventionally speaking, phenomenally speaking, we can say this person is Tashi as opposed to that person, and that suffices for them to exist. You're creating the conditions for someone to understand, oh, this person is who we call Tashi in the world. And if you were to then engage in deeper analysis, like ultimate analysis, well, where really is Tashi within that basis of designation? Then this becomes what we would call analysis into suchness. So here, if one is not satisfied with mere imputation by name and analyzes on the basis of wanting to investigate how the basis exists, or like to be able to find the thing that is so referred to, like we designate, oh, this is Tashi, but then if you're to try to find, oh, that is the thing, here, that's like the engaging in ultimate analysis, wherein we are looking for that thing as it appears to us in this way that it exists from the side of the object. And if we were to find something that existed in the way that it appears, this would ultimately exist. However, we don't actually find anything that exists in the way that it appears. This is then an analysis into suchness. Here, like if we say, oh, this is Tashi, and that is not Tashi, in order for us to be able to distinguish between people, to have an understanding of a level of conventional existence that is mere designation, here, to be designated by thought is sufficient for something to exist, and we can coherently understand that within the world. We can say, oh, that's Tashi over there, as opposed to someone else. But if we then say, well, but where is Tashi really? Like, where is that thing so referenced? What is it within that those aggregates or that basis of designation that is that thing? Then we can't find. There's nothing to be found in this way. So here we can say, like, oh yes, I see that person who's Tashi, and that suffices for that kind of nominal existence. But if we are to then try to go beyond that, that becomes an ultimate analysis, and we have to distinguish between the sort of thing that is found through analyzing nominally existent phenomenon, analyzing that level of reality, versus engaging in ultimate reality. So here, if one is satisfied with mere imputation by name and investigates, like for example, whether Devadatta comes and goes, then it is a nominal analysis. We can say, oh, Devadatta is coming, or oh, where is Devadatta? Oh, he's over there. And if that is satisfying to us, if that satisfies our need to know, then this is the nominal level of reality. It's a mere label, it's a mere name, but we can still understand, and based upon the kind of renown within the world, there is coherency to that level of existence. But if we try to find the kind of ultimate nature of that thing, or try to find something that we can point to, I mean, it feels to us this way, right? Like, especially when we have a strong affliction, we're like, oh, I'm right here. Tibetans maybe will like point to their head, or point to, like, bang on their chest, thinking that, like, yeah, but there's this this thing that is right here, and we have that sort of a sense. But when we begin to investigate and try to find the thing that we can point to, there isn't anything that can be pointed to. So that is ultimate analysis, or analysis into the ultimate nature of phenomenon, the analysis of suchness. And whereas there is another level of analysis which has to do with the way that things exist by mere imputation. And the kind of, we usually refer to this as when we don't don't investigate or don't analyze, but there's a level of which we are analyzing in the sense of like, well, that's Devadatta and that's Tashi and so forth. But when we try to go beyond that surface level, that mere label or mere imputation, we then get into ultimate analysis. And when we go to that point of ultimate analysis, that's where the thing is unfindable. There's nothing that we can point to that actually exists in the way that it appears to us. Although we all have this sense with objects and with ourselves that, oh, but I'm right here. I exist in and of myself. I could point to me here. There isn't actually something that we can find, that we can identify that is that thing as it appears to us. That is an impossibility. So it's important, however, to understand these two levels of analysis. So here, when we talk about this kind of again, nominal analysis or things existing by the force of convention is the word I usually use. Convention can refer to the kind of names, the sound that we give as a name to things, as well as the concept, the sort of thought, the mental thought. We see something and we think, oh, that is an object, and then we give it a particular name. And so there is a basis of designation, and in dependence upon that, we give names. We say, oh, this is this person, or this is that person. Oh, they are good, they are bad, and so forth. So there is this basis of designation, which is comprised of various parts, none of which is the thing itself. But on that basis, we then give a label, give a name to it, and that is merely nominally existent. We can't actually point to something within that basis of designation that exists as such.
koa karazo koa po kasa koa koa da nyande nyega tonda mama druba nyamba resere sishi nyamba nyesudo sibasine koa la sigora shiwasine tele tarba tele sigora sishi nyamba nyesudo tonda mama druba nyamba rangune beba nyamba maranjene koa de rangune meba she sangye da choda tarba to rangune yo samsang sa chenpo sunza yore samsang chinde samye nyanga yora the koada sanjeda tarvada kanga rangune mebate chibad nyambare sora sishi nyambani yes ta yes labsa sishi nyambani to tobase o desero tingi to na kebar mese koada nyangale deba de konangi to tumadule keba mese tonda matumadule keba mese ora de konangi le chebase tele chen mebate le keba yo mare sora. Yeah,
So here then the second half of this verse again having gone beyond misery and having not gone they do not have any distinction. So here the words that are used like having passed beyond misery is referring to that state of nirvana, and being in existence is referring to still being in cyclic existence. And these are equally not ultimately existent. They are equal in not having that kind of inherent existence. We might be prone to thinking like, oh, samsara, that's not inherently existent, but these beings like a Buddha, the Dharma, the Sangha, those are really existent. They exist from their own side. But here it is important to recognize that both of these, the state of still being within samsara or the state of having passed beyond that misery, are not distinct. They are both in the sense of both being not ultimately existent, not truly existent. So we shouldn't fall into thinking that like the three jewels, the Buddha, the Dharma, the Sangha, somehow have a real true existence or are not the same in nature as samsara. Whereas as this verse is establishing, both samsara, the state of suffering, and having passed beyond misery are equal in being empty of inherent existence.
Nên nó không khác gì nhau giữa luân hồi và niết bàn.
So we have reached the time for today, so we'll stop there.